Adrian, it's our final episode of the season, and I'm going to kick off with some lyrics I need you to finish. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
There can be miracles
if you believe.
You did it. Well, you kind of. It's when you believe, but you were extremely close. Extremely close.
What did I say?
You said if you believe.
Oh, shoot. I thought when you believe. Okay, Thank you. Did you see the fear in my eyes when you started? I was like, I don't know. Oh, I know. And it just came out.
I'm so proud of you. Yes, I did see the fear in your eyes, and I was like, oh no, she doesn't know this iconic song. That's how we're going to kick off the finale of Two Queens, Two Crowns.
Not on my throne. Not on my throne.
That's exactly right. Well, you nailed it. And yes, we are talking about Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey for our finale.
Tell me why seconds ago, before we started this, I spoke to someone. They were like, what's your podcast? I was like, oh, we talk about like how women who've been pitted against each other are actually both have crowns, like Whitney and Mariah, even though we had never done a Whitney and Mariah episode. How is that for kismet?
Look at that. It's like the universe was telling you to be thinking of these two women. And I have to tell you, I've been sitting on this episode for weeks and weeks and weeks because I just knew they had to be our finale. Like, come on. They had to be.
Obviously. 100%.
Obviously. Yeah. So I'm so excited to talk about these two queens, the queens of all queens, Whitney and Mariah. Hello and welcome to Two Queens, Two Crowns. I'm your host, KJ Miller, founder, lecturer, and content creator.
And I'm Adrian Rose White, writer, producer, teacher of how to actually sell a TV show organically, and actress in the upcoming movie Night Bitch. Look out.
And tonight, it is our season finale, which I know. Don't be too sad because it's an epic episode about the one and only Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey. And I'm just like, I'm over the moon that I get to spend the next hour talking about these two with you, my bestie.
I'm so excited because per usual, I know surface level, but I cannot wait for the deep dive. I cannot wait to hear from the real, true day one fan what really the story is about. I'm so excited for this episode. And to hang with my bestie.
And I have to tell you, and I mentioned this right before we hopped on, like, I'm really hoping I can do it justice because one thing I definitely did do in preparation for this episode is read a million articles, watch a million interviews with the two of them. Like, I just consumed so much content. But one thing I did not necessarily do is try to organize all my thoughts. There's a lot in here.
I love it. It's like jazz. We'll improvise. I can't wait to hear.
One way or another, we're going to give these queens their due. Okay? We're going to do it. Okay. So as always, I want to start with a little bit of a history lesson with these two, just to really get us centered in their queendoms, because I got to tell you, I am a super fan of both of them. But when I really went back and looked at the timeline of their chart-topping success in the 80s and 90s, it's unbelievable. I just can't even name any other artists who did what these two did in their prime. Okay, so let's start with Whitney because she was born first. She's a little bit older. So now Whitney was born in 1963. She was signed when she was 19 years old to Arista Records by Clive Davis. And her first album came out in 1985. So at that point, she would have been about 22 years old. Okay. Now, this first album, it was a self-titled album. So it was called Whitney Houston. It had 3 number 1 hits. All right. Including, you might recall some of these: How Will I Know, Greatest Love of All, and Saving All My Love. Do any of those ring a bell for you, Adrian?
Saving all my love for you.
Yes.
I mean, I mean, on her first album? I didn't know that.
First. Is anyone really giving it to us like that on a first album anymore? No.
No. I mean, no. Okay, we're just saying no. That's perfect. That's great.
For
the purposes of this call.
Right, for the purposes of this episode, no. And also just her voice, I just feel like when she hit the scene, that voice is so it's like wine. It's so smooth and so satisfying. Or for the non-drinkers among us, it's like butter. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. It's just so smooth, but thick, like thick. It's like a blanket. Like, I feel like when I listen to Saving All My Love, like I'm putting on a blanket,
It sounds rich.
Yeah,
like that.
rich. Yeah. It's
creamy.
And it's comforting, but also a little like challenging, because it's so powerful. You're almost like caught off guard by it a little when she sings. I mean, and I still to this day, I was listening to some of her songs in preparation for this episode multiple times. Tears were brought to my eyes because I just truly feel like, people called her the voice for a reason. Her voice just kind of knocks you off of your feet. And that was true from like moment one, album one. Okay. So she comes out with her self-titled album in 1985. It has 3 number 1 hits back to back to back consecutively. Okay. Then 2 years later, not even, she hits us with her second album, which gives her 4 consecutive number 1 hits, which makes her the first woman artist in history to have 7 consecutive number 1 hits. Can you even fathom that? 7 consecutive number 1 hits?
I know what the word consecutive means, but what does it mean in this context? Does that mean every single release became a number 1 hit?
Correct. It means she had all 7 of her singles that she released in a row go to number 1.
Wow.
Yeah.
If a baseball player did that.
Right?
I don't know.
They'd
be in the Hall of Fame.
As you know, we know a lot about sports. And so
I can about sports.
I can confidently say if a baseball player had 7 number 1 anythings, he'd be extremely successful. So yes, this was like unheard of. Okay. That's just her first 2 albums. And by the way, both of those albums go to number 1. So not just the singles, the albums both go to number 1. Okay. So that was 1985 and 1987. Then her third album, she releases in 1990. So 3 years later. And what is so wild to me is that album, it's called I'm Your Baby Tonight. It sold 5 million units in the US, but only went to number 3. That's how many albums people were moving in the 90s, okay? 5 million units and went to number 3, which is just insane when you think about it.
Can I ask, and you don't have to know the answer, but like how many units do you have to move now to get a number 1? Or is it just different because it's like streams or something?
Yeah, it is. It is different, but not 5 million, not 10 million, because her first 2 albums both sold. The first one went 14 times platinum. Okay, that's 14 million albums. Her second one went diamond. That's 10 million albums. So the fact that her third one did 5 million, it was seen as a drop and it didn't go to number 1. It only went to number 3. But yes, in today's context, to sell 5 million albums, you would be so far on top. Like, that is a crazy number. It's a crazy number. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I was like, I don't even have a reference point to know if it's crazy high or crazy low or just great.
No,
that makes sense.
It is.
That's insanely high.
Yes, it is crazy high. And mind you, not 2 years after the third one does she release the Bodyguard soundtrack. Okay? The Bodyguard soundtrack is still the most successful soundtrack of all time. It came out in 1992, Adrian. We are in the year of our Lord, 2024. And still, no one has made a better soundtrack. Okay?
Wow.
Yes. Yes.
Like,
so
no
Whitney,
soundtrack has sold more units than that one?
nope.
Wow.
And I'm pretty sure the only ones that have come close have been her other soundtracks, which would be Waiting to Exhale and The Preacher's Wife. Like, she is just that dominant. And yeah, her song, because of course on The Bodyguard, that's when we got I Will Always Love You. That song, just that song, sold 25 million copies worldwide. 25 million.
Okay, people will buy copies of just a song. I'm so sorry. I should know these things, but like,
Did you
people
never
will
buy singles when you were like in middle school and high school?
No, I always bought albums.
Oh, I love the single because you could buy a single for like $1. You could go into Best Buy and get a single for $1. Oh, I loved it. And yes, people were walking into Best Buy and Radio Shack and whomever, wherever. 25 million copies.
Wow. Wow. See, I'm learning so much today about Whitney, about culture, about the music industry in the 90s.
Yes. Yes. So she was, I mean, just truly dominating. So we just covered from 1985 to 1992. She dropped 3 albums, 2 of which went to #1, 1 of which went to #3. And the Bodyguard soundtrack became the best-selling soundtrack of all time on the strength of basically her and her alone. Are there a couple other people on that soundtrack? Yes, but it is pretty much... It's pretty much just Whitney. I mean, in terms of what anyone cares about, it's Whitney. Like, all of that in under a decade, crazy.
Wow. I would say I forgot, but I didn't know in the first place. I knew she was incredible, but to get to the specifics of just how she executed, damn.
Yeah. Same. I feel like I kind of sort of knew some of this, but didn't really know all the specifics, and to really look at it in black and white and really think about it, particularly thinking about how young she was. Like I said, her debut album came out when she was 22 years old. So by the time we got to The Bodyguard, she was 29, not even 30. So to be, I mean, just dominating in this way, so young, just such total industry annihilation almost is, I think, it's just, you kind of have to remark at it. You have to really sit in awe of it because it's not happening like that anymore. It really isn't.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's Whitney. Let me pivot a little bit to Mariah, because right now I just want to give you a little bit of the background, the history, the highlights. So Mariah was born in 1969. So she's just 6 years younger than Whitney. And for whatever reason, in my mind, I always, I guess maybe pictured her or sort of assumed she was like a decade or so younger than Whitney. Do you remember thinking that way, or did you think they were closer in age?
I did think Whitney was a little bit older, but I didn't have a strong opinion. Like, to me, they were both adults, you know what I mean? So I sort of categorized everyone over the age of 17 sort of blended together.
Yeah.
When I was young.
Yeah. And I think, what I remember about that is, yes, thinking they were both adults, but in my mind, Whitney seemed just like a bit more mature. And I think part of that is, and we'll get into this maybe a little bit later, but Mariah, it's almost like if you look at her first albums and then her more like 4th, 5th albums, the subject matter actually gets a little less mature. The vibe gets like a little more fun, a little more cutesy versus where it started. So by the time she was on her, call it 4th or 5th album, that's when we would have been in high school, and that would have been the Mariah Carey that really solidified for me. Whereas at that same time, Whitney was, you know, far past waiting to exhale, like, you know, just grown, just like not cutesy, grown. Yeah. So I think in my mind, she was much older than Mariah, but she in reality was just 6 years older than her. So that was like kind of fact number one that kind of blew me away.
You know what? That makes a lot of sense. I think Mariah had the emancipation of Mimi and like lots of rainbows and was just kind of
Rainbow
like
was an album. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like I remember that energy, yeah, which is very different from that grow. It felt like Mariah was having the childhood she didn't get to have, I think because of Tommy Matola. I don't know if that's a thing. Yeah. But it seemed like she was kind of doing the stuff that she wasn't allowed, being the self she wasn't allowed to be, something like that.
Yes. And we will get into that, absolutely. But exactly, like she had an album called Rainbow. She had an album called Butterfly. She had Emancipation of Mimi, and all of them, I think, were pop. And they're both pop singers, but all of, you know, those albums I named felt like kind of firmly ensconced in the pop music of its time, where Whitney always seemed to be like pop for the ages. You know?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Timeless songs.
Yeah. So
ballads, you know? Power ballads.
Exactly. So that was sort of surprise number one to me, was realizing like, oh, actually they were much closer in age than I think in my mind I had really understood. So born in 1969, she gets signed to Columbia Records and comes out with her debut album in 1990. So just to put that in the timeline of Whitney's albums, her first album debuted just a few months before Whitney's third album. So at the time that Mariah is coming onto the scene, Whitney has already had 2 number one albums, both of which have gone, you know, multiple platinum. Okay, so she is that girl. Okay, now here comes Mariah. She bursts onto the scene, and her first 4 singles, as in the first 4 times we've ever heard Mariah sing anything, all 4 go to number one.
Sounds familiar.
Okay, and the album goes to number one. And this is going to be important for the Rivalry narrative, because her album goes to number one. She releases her album in June 1990. Whitney releases her third album in November 1990, and that's the one that doesn't go to number one, goes to number 3. And so right away, the conversation starts, oh, Mariah's the new Whitney.
Media.
It's like clockwork, right? Like people are just waiting. They're preying on your downfall. Here's Whitney. First of all, having an album go to number 3 is extremely respectable. Second of all, she sold 5 million units. Third of all, she's already a household name. Okay. But here goes Mariah, and her album shoots to the top of the charts. I think it ends up selling like 8 million. She's number 1, and all of a sudden, everyone's saying, she's the new Whitney. She's taking over. And Whitney hates it, because not only is she the new Whitney, but Whitney's mad, right? That's the other part of the narrative. Whitney's mad that someone is coming in and taking her spot. Just immediately, that becomes the media narrative.
That is so frustrating. I mean, we have a whole podcast about this. It makes sense. But every time I hear it, I'm like, gross.
So frustrating, and I mean, so predictable. You know, if there's anything that I think I am so grateful for this podcast in doing, just like for me personally, is making plain the playbook from the media as it relates to powerful women moving in similar lanes is so predictable. Of course, she comes out, releases a power ballad, goes to number 1, and the first thing people say isn't, hey, look at this amazing bright young star, this new voice, this talent. It is, here's the new Whitney. It's extremely predictable.
And I know we mentioned this in other episodes, but it's like, I can't think of 2 male singers pitted against each other in that way. You know what I mean? Like, any rappers that are beefing, it's usually because they pick a beef with each other very publicly and then make albums about it.
Yeah.
But like no media's, I don't know. That's just so frustrating that that's exclusive. It seems somewhat exclusive to women too.
100%. And by the way, Oprah made the same point. So you and Oprah are in agreement, because when she had them on her show, this was several years later, this was in 1998, after they did their iconic duet. But one of the first things Oprah said to both of them in the interview was, you know, you guys were always pitted against each other as these rivals, and I never saw it happening to men. It only was women. And to your point, 100%. It's true. It's very hard to think about or to think of examples of famous men who were just automatically and repeatedly and exhaustively pitted against one another. The closest I can even think of is how, I don't know if you ever see when people talk about who's the best Chris, like is it Chris Pine, Chris Hemsworth?
Sure. But they're mostly joking. But yeah, Chris Pine.
Yeah, they're mostly
it's like
joking.
A funny, yeah.
And like, they're all rich and famous. Chris Pine, Chris Hemsworth, Chris, what's his name, Pratt. They're all rich and famous. So, but yeah, I feel like that's the closest I can even really think of, because it doesn't really happen for men. So anywho, she has 4 singles immediately go to number 1. We got Vision of Love, Love Takes Time, Someday, and I Don't Want to Cry. Are those ringing bells for you? Do you recall those?
I'm so embarrassed, but I'm trying. Can you sing like the most popular of those 4?
Well, to me, the one that feels the most popular is Vision of Love. I had a vision of love, and it was all that you given to me. I had a vision of love. And she hits a crazy high note at the end, you know, as only Mariah can do. Anywho, all 4.
First of all, can we give it up for Kristen Jones? Kristen Jones.
I might completely edit that out because I think it sounded terrible. But yes, so all 4 go to number 1. And what's so interesting, kind of bringing back to that point of like, it's almost like the maturity level came down a bit, is now, I don't know if this has been confirmed, but industry rumor is that Tommy Matola, who produced, you know, pretty much her entire first album and who she later married, Tommy Matola was at Columbia Records. And at the time, he was seeing the success of Whitney over at Arista and wanted that type of success on his record label. Because, and part of the reason was because Barbra Streisand, who was signed to Columbia, had started focusing more on her film career. And so they felt like, oh, we don't have the powerhouse vocal diva. We need our own. Like, they have Whitney, we need a Whitney. And so part of the lore is that he signed Mariah and then kind of packaged her like a Whitney, which is why we got these power ballads that were, you know, similar, at least in terms of like packaging, as Whitney's power ballads. But why, as, you know, Mariah got away from Tommy Matola because she eventually divorced him and then wrote about him in her book and how like controlling he was and whatever, she started to do things that were like more fun, more flirty, more, you know, just like of the time. So that's the lore. I don't know that it's like fully confirmed. I don't know if Tommy Matola would agree with that, but that is
he
the
and
lore.
I have not chatted in some time. I could not comment on that.
Exactly. But yes, the lore is that part of the reason we even get these comparisons is because Tommy Matola himself brought Mariah on with the goal of having a Whitney at Columbia Records, which I thought was very interesting.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that makes, especially how executives and producers approach things. A lot of times they look at what's successful and say, okay, I mean, that sort of goes back to the Britney and Christina that we talked about before, right? Like, oh, this is the thing that's working. How do we have our version of that?
Yeah. And I feel like you have a front row seat to that in Hollywood, because I feel like, at least from what I've heard, now I don't know, but from what I've heard, a lot of times studios execs in Hollywood are also like, oh, that thing that's working over there on Netflix or is working over there at CBS, like, I want my version of it.
I don't think I'm breaking anyone's brain when I say it's, you know how when kids play soccer and there are no real positions because they're all 4 years old and they all just run to the ball, like wherever the ball, like, it's happening. That is, so I have heard executives compared to this, that when there's something shiny, they're like, how do we all get our version of that thing?
Yeah.
So yeah. Understandable. Like you want the next hit. It feels like the safest way to get it. I get it.
Yeah, totally. So she gives us her first album. 4 singles go to number 1. Immediately, she's being compared to Whitney Houston. And then her second album, which was released a year later, also goes to number 1. That's called Emotions. It sells 8 million albums. And then, so she had 1990, number 1 album, 1991, a number 1 album, and then 1993, she releases Music Box. This is her first album to go diamond, which means selling over 10 million albums. So she just like in very quick succession becomes another just like mind-blowing voice. And by the way, Music Box becomes her best-selling album, but in 1994, 1 year later, she drops her iconic Christmas album. That, of course, gives us All I Want for Christmas Is You, which is one of the few songs to go number 1 in multiple years, year after year after year. So, like, this was her first 4 years on the scene.
Wow. I didn't realize that was her first 4 years on the scene. Oh my God.
Yes.
Strike while the iron is hot.
100%. I mean, it's like for both of them, that first few years, 4 or 5 years, was just an unprecedented run in terms of chart topping success. Some of the records they broke in those first few years still have not been broken. Okay, 20 years later, still have not been broken. That's how dominant they were.
Wow. Oh, I love that for them.
Okay, so that was, their career highlights, which I think is very important just to get us in the mindset of like really what we're talking about when we call these women queens, okay, because truly they were dominating. But I want to pivot now and talk a little bit about their personal lives, because I do think that's also relevant to sort of how this rivalry started to play out and also kind of like what their later careers ended up looking like. So to start with Whitney, obviously, let's just say up front, we lost Whitney way too soon. We lost her to a drug addiction. She had, she struggled with addiction. She had a number of personal battles. But I think the one that was most, I guess, surprising to me that I learned years and years ago from watching, it was an unauthorized biopic. I don't even remember what it was called. Okay. But I remember Kadar and I we still lived in New York at the time, and we went to this tiny little theater because it wasn't being shown in the big theaters. It was that unauthorized. Okay. I don't know who made this film, but,
just like a random film.
Yeah.
Like what is this?
Made this movie? I don't
am
know.
Concerned about sources, but continue.
Yes, it was an unauthorized biopic. And in that movie, now this has since been confirmed. I wouldn't be telling it to you if it hadn't been confirmed. But in that movie, what I learned was that Whitney had been in a multi-decade relationship with a woman. And this woman had started as, romantic / sexual, then became more platonic, like friendship based. This woman, her name is Robin Crawford, ended up being the maid of honor at her wedding to Bobby Brown. And then over the course of their relationship played a lot of roles, was her personal assistant, was on her management team of her company, was always very close to her, and has said, 'cause she went on to write a book, has said that the relationship was somewhat fluid. At times it was a bit more romantic, at times it was a bit more friendship based, but they were essentially like best friends for 2.5 decades. And I just remember that realization, or discovery, really casting a whole new understanding for me of Whitney, because basically what they argued in the film, and actually what Robin Crawford agreed with and Bobby Brown later agreed with. He is on record later saying if Whitney had been able to really be herself and really love Robin the way she wanted to, she'd still be with us today.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, for me, I feel like one of the biggest revelations about Whitney for me was that she felt from a very young age, you know, she grew up in an extremely religious household, that she would never be accepted for being gay. And I don't know if like gay is the label she would use. Maybe she'd use bisexual, whatever, you know, I don't know how she would label it, but she would never be accepted for having any sort of romantic relationship with a woman. And so that was a part of herself she always hid. Never was public about it, never, you know. And there are a number of people who would argue that just really broke her down, you know, in a lot of ways.
I would believe that. I would believe that if something is important to you and central to who you are, to have to always hide it and to believe that you wouldn't be loved or accepted, or even, you know, from her, she has so much that she could lose everything if she was herself in public. Oh, that I at least as I understand it, so many people turn to addiction or turn to these other sources when they can't live, when they feel they can't safely live their authentic lives.
Yeah. And you know, I don't want to speculate too much because I don't know, but certainly you can understand why if someone feels like I am forever masking, I am forever having to put on this face, put on this front, why, like you said, you would turn to other numbing sources and opportunities because you can never fully be yourself. And so I think that that's just important to recognize. Obviously, we lost Whitney so soon, so early. She was 48 when she passed.
Wow.
And, you know, I think about what her world would have been like, what our world would have been like if she had felt like she could be forthcoming, you know, with all of who she was. And also I think it's important to note that one thing she really struggled with early in her career as well, and maybe this even played into another reason why she felt like she couldn't be fully forthcoming about her, you know, maybe sexual orientation, was in the beginning of her career, a lot of people felt like she wasn't Black enough. And in fact, she ended up getting booed at the Soul Train Awards early on in her career. And people even referred to her, I didn't know this until I started researching, there were people who referred to her as Whitey Houston.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Terrible. Because people felt like you're not really R&B. You're singing these, you know, power ballads, these like mainstream middle America power ballads that are clearly meant to be palatable for, you know, white people all over the country. Like, you're not really for us. You're not really for the culture. And there was this sentiment. And so she was sort of battling up against that, trying to prove her Blackness, battling up against like the church and her upbringing, saying like, you can't be with a woman, and like, this is what a relationship looks like. It is a man and a woman. That's just, and she's 22 when you know, when all of this is happening. That is just such a heavy cross to bear.
Wow. I had no idea. I just had no idea. And that she not just managed, but like in many ways thrived for many years, or did such great work even under those circumstances, just speaks to her immense talent and commitment. And I can just imagine how anyone under that kind of consistent pressure, like how it could start to burn you out, you know?
Oh, 100%. I mean, you know, and I think about this all the time as it relates to the LGBT community. I like to think of myself as an ally. I hope that I'm an ally. I think about this all the time, like what it would do to me if I couldn't love the person I love, right? Or I couldn't outwardly love the person I love, how that would I mean, I think it would nearly kill me, right? And the fact that there's so many people who live with that all over the world, oh, it just, and to think that that, potentially was Whitney as well, it breaks my heart.
Me too. What was that person's name again? Robin
Crawford. Mm-hmm.
Robin Crawford. Okay. So did she, I mean, in her book, I don't know, what does she say about, I don't even know what I'm asking here. Like,
Yeah, I mean, now I did not go and read Robin Crawford's book. I mainly read excerpts from the book. But from what she described, she really was always in Whitney's life, was always a best friend to her, always tried to be there for her and support her. But she does say that she ended up taking a step away from Whitney because of the drug use and because of realizing, like, the quote in the book was something to the effect of, we would set up these like boundaries and these parameters around, like, okay, this is what it's going to look like you're only going to use this much or on these days. And no matter what we said, she would always just end up using all the time. And I couldn't watch that. I couldn't watch her do that to herself, essentially. And so she ended up taking a step back. She never stepped fully back. She said they still kept in touch, but she did like leave the company, move to a different state. It was like, I can't keep watching this happen to you.
yeah, and I get that, especially if someone is your work partner, your life partner, your best friend, like for them to have such a big, for you to, that there's a type of enmeshment that could be. And then if the person you're in that enmeshment with is also using drugs, I could absolutely see having to take a step back at some point when there's nothing else you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think for me, the takeaway I have about Whitney's private life is that it seems like there was just a lot she was having to mask, a lot that she wasn't able to live authentically or publicly, and that it really weighed on her. That's sort of my takeaway.
Yeah. Oh, this feels trite to say, but heavy is the head that wears the crown. Like, it sounds like I wonder if she could have lived more of her own life if she weren't in such a public, so public. I mean, everyone knew who Whitney Houston was,
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm so sad that she had such a talent in a culture that wouldn't support her to be her whole self.
Yeah, 100,000%. And not only was she so successful and kind of, had to wear that crown, she also was supporting an entire ecosystem of people around her. Every film she made depended on her. She was the reason people were watching. She was the reason it was getting financed and produced. She was the draw for her albums, for her tours, for everything. Like, everyone's relying on her. So to feel like, oh, it's not just maybe I'll get spoken badly about in the tabloids. It's, oh, this could tank my career. It could tank this film. It could tank this soundtrack. And then all of these people who are relying on me for a paycheck, now I've ruined that. Just that level of pressure is just so tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so did Mariah go through something similar? What was Mariah's life like?
So, we mentioned Tommy Matola, and what it sounds like to me, based on what Mariah has said, both in interviews and what she's written about in her book, is that a real transformation happened once she got out from under Tommy Matola. And he held it against her and sort of tried to retaliate against her for leaving him, and essentially like rebirthing her career after him. Nevertheless, she persisted and was very successful, right? So I think what you see with Mariah that very sadly you don't see with Whitney is that she was able to emerge from her dark circumstance. She was able to get out from under the person who was sort of weighing her down and expecting her to be Whitney 2.0 and to write these sorts of songs and sing this sort of music. She was able to get from under that and really emerge herself. You know, I think most people, when they talk about Mariah, they talk about just like how fully constituted she is as a person, right? Like she knows who she is. And I think so much of that really can be attributed to her being able to leave a circumstance that was very, very unhealthy for her in a way that I think, you know, Whitney kind of never was able to.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I do. It's funny now. I never put this together, but even thinking of, I remember a few years ago, I think there was some sound check issue at Christmas, and people kept acting like Mariah Carey had like messed it up or done something wrong. Like there were these memes that were like, "Hold my beer," and I just remembered every time I saw Mariah, she was like, "I'm good." She like it just rolled off her, at least publicly. I don't obviously I don't know what's going on, and I was so impressed because so many people, if like the whole world was like making fun of them, you'd see more of a reaction. And she was like, the energy I got, again, I don't know, is I've been through worse. I'm the best. I'm not pressed about this. And then she went out and did another great show. And I was like, correct, you know?
So just to give a sense of how controlling Tommy Matola was, this is a quote from her book, which came out in 2020. It's called The Meaning of Mariah Carey. She wrote, "It felt like he was cutting off my circulation, keeping me from my friends and what little family I had. I couldn't talk to anyone that wasn't under Tommy's control. I couldn't go out or do anything with anybody. I couldn't move freely in my own house. Many reasonable people questioned why I married Tommy, but none of them questioned the decision more than I did." So, you know, I think it's very clear that she felt like it really wasn't until she got out from under him that she was able to be herself. And it's funny because in some ways, yes, her music started to feel a little bit less mature, but not, what I don't mean by that is that it felt juvenile. You know, it just felt more fun, more carefree, and more like her being willing to explore different sides of herself that maybe we just didn't get to see when she was married to / being produced by Tommy Matola.
And it's interesting because he spent a lot of, I mean, it sounds like if that story is true, it sounds like he spent a lot of time making sure she was hyper palatable to what people wanted at that moment. And so her being herself was, I mean, it wasn't designed to be as palatable. I mean, it was more than, it was fantastic. But I just remember this DJ in my hometown was like always hated on Mariah Carey. Was always like, oh, I used to like her, but now she's all blah, 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 blah. And I just remembered when I heard the Tommy Mottola thing, I just thought, yeah, because it's not for you. Like, she didn't create who she was with you in mind. And good for her. Like,
right.
I thought about that. I was like, I wonder if Tommy Mottola reached out to some radio people and was like, hey, just like shit on Mariah Carey a whole bunch. Because, I just remembered that, the crazy judgment.
Yeah.
I thought.
Well, to your point, like Carey, this is one of the things that Mariah spoke about in her book, really feeling like Tommy Mottola attempted to sabotage her in a number of different ways. So she spoke about, this is another quote, she spoke about him attempting to sabotage the release of her movie Glitter, which came out in 2001. She wrote, "There was no way he would allow me to have a huge success after leaving him in Sony. He was not going to let me or Glitter shine." And so she felt like, yes, he was going to studios, talking bad about her, taking songs that maybe, or beats that she was going to use, samples she was going to use for different songs, giving them to other artists, like going out of his way to try and make her fail. So that's kind of the personal history I wanted to get into, just to give us a sense of, obviously not just their success, but what both of these women were really going through and living through and getting through as they were navigating their careers. So now I want to pivot to the rivalry and really dig into why it got started, sort of what shape it took, and how they got through it. Because, spoiler alert, they got through it. And that's another reason I felt like these two would be so good as a finale, because it's such a clear example of two women who were very aware of the rivalry narrative, who maybe played into it a little bit, but who ultimately moved past it and realized, I respect and admire this woman, and we are better for having each other, you know? So another reason why I thought it would be a great finale. Okay, so as I mentioned, in 1990, when Mariah Carey debuted, immediately she's being compared to Whitney. And then, of course, when Whitney's third album doesn't go to number one, people are saying, oh, Mariah's the new Whitney. She's coming to take your spot, right? And obviously, Whitney is hearing all of this. So she then is on a talk show shortly thereafter, and she's asked by the host, so what do you think of, the host says, Mariah Carey was on the show last week. And Whitney goes, oh, was she? Oh, great. And then the host says, so what do you think of Mariah? And Whitney, she pauses. She says, what do I think of her? I don't think of her. Which is perfect. If ever you were going to throw shade at somebody, I just think that is perfect shade. Now, she did try to clean it up afterwards. She goes, I don't think of her. And then she pauses for a beat, and then she says, but she's a beautiful singer, beautiful vocal. She's trying to clean it up at this point, but it's like, ma'am.
You just said, I don't think of her.
You said what you said. You did what you did. So, of course, that gets picked up and blasted everywhere. And now it's, now basically the media is like, we told you that Whitney was mad. We told you there was a rivalry. We told you there was a feud. Look at what she said. So this gets blasted out, very, very widely. So then the rumor is, now we don't have confirmation of this, but the rumor is that, shortly thereafter, they're at the Grammys, and Whitney, it goes up to Mariah to say hi, like basically say like, oh, hi, whatever. And Mariah just like about faces and pretends like she didn't hear her, when like she very clearly did. Okay. So this again sets off all the rumors. This is a rivalry. It's a feud. They hate each other, so this is what's going on kind of in the background. Now, a lot of what's being said about them is just, there's no evidence for whatsoever. Even this little rumor about Mariah blowing her off. We don't have any evidence of that. The media is just going to town. What we do have is this one clip of Whitney saying, I don't think of her, but then very clearly saying, but she's got a great voice. And then there are also a number of interviews where each of them is asked directly about each other and does say nice things, right? Like I watched one clip where someone asked Whitney about Mariah. I think the way it was phrased was, how do you feel about the fact that people are always comparing Mariah to you? And her answer essentially was, Mariah has a beautiful voice. She's an amazing singer. I think Mariah should be, essentially, I think Mariah should be spoken about for Mariah. I don't think Mariah should be spoken about in comparison to me or to anyone else. And then likewise, I saw a clip of Mariah being asked, how do you feel about being compared to Whitney? And she was like, well, look, there are worse people for me to be compared to. She's, got an amazing voice, but I don't think there's any need for comparison, right? So there are all these examples of both of them not taking the bait. You've got this one example of Whitney kind of taking the bait, but not really. She didn't slam her. She just said, I don't think of her.
And also, I think it's funny because it is shady, but it is like a funny, like it's a funny line. Like, oh, what do I think of her? I don't think about her. Like,
right.
That is, in another context that would be really playful and fun. I can see why it got traction and proved the thing, but there's a part of me, there's this somewhat naive little part that's like, that was a good joke for a late night show.
Yeah. Well, and, kind of a good joke, fun shade. There's some shade that feels very, very mean and some shade that feels a bit more fun. And I think that leans a bit more fun, but also, we spoke about this in our Cardi B, Nicki Minaj episode. there is definitely something to be said for feeling like I don't want to keep talking about someone else, right? And at this particular point, Mariah keeps getting brought up. Mind you, Whitney has sold 20 million albums at this point, and she's trying to promote
why
her.
are we talking about this? Yeah.
Why are we talking about, like, it's perfectly understandable that if you're out trying to promote your album and you've sold 20 million and you've been overseas and you've done this, that, and the third, if every interview is bringing up somebody else, that at some point you might get a little snarky, right? Like, that's just human.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's true. It's kind of like the snark isn't even directed at Mariah. It's like directed to the question. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I get that.
So that's kind of what's bubbling and bristling, in the background after Mariah hops onto the scene. We're getting the media narrative that there's a rivalry. They really aren't playing into it. That's going on and whatever and whatever. And then in 1998, they both get on the song When You Believe for the Prince of Egypt soundtrack. And it is just so iconic.
I love that. It's funny. I kept thinking Prince of Egypt, but I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember which one was on it because it was both.
It just is one of those songs. I want to play just a little bit of it because it's so iconic. And I went back and listened to it and watched the music video earlier today and immediately was crying. Part of it is Whitney's gone and it's hard for me to listen to her without getting a little bit emotional. But also the song is just so good and they sound so good together. It's unreal.
I love hearing you talk about music. I have a richer experience of music after I hear you talk about it and how it feels to you. I can't wait to hear this song. That was so beautiful.
Isn't it? Doesn't it touch you, like, truly?
Deeply. I have never... That's what, like, it's funny. I also sing the lyrics. Like I remembered more of the song. I realized there were words I didn't know what they were. I just remembered the sounds, so it never like stuck. But seeing that with them, especially with all this context, oh my God!
I know.
I felt it in my whole body.
I know.
So powerful. I could like chills.
Yeah. I just feel like you so rarely get duets like that. It is, in my opinion, like the most iconic duet of all time. And because they're just both so vocally powerful, but also it's not like they're screaming over each other. They're both letting the other person shine at different moments, and you're getting the different flavors of their voices because their voices are quite different from one another. It's everything, right? Such an iconic duet. And they have both gone on record and spoken about like just how much fun they had doing that song together. And what's more, and I really think this is where rumors of a rivalry really got put to bed. They both agreed to do the song, fine, but they could have just done the song and let that be that. And by the way, it did win an Academy Award for Best Original Song. Okay. So they're both Oscar winners also, but they could have just done the song. But then they went and did real promo for the song together. They went and did an Oprah interview together. They went and did multiple performances together. And then even separately spoke about how much they both enjoyed working with one another. And it was sort of like the media kind of had no choice but to be like, oh, okay, I guess y'all are not really rivals. And it's funny because if you go back and read articles at first, there still was this narrative of like, oh, they still hate each other. They didn't even record together. And Mariah redid her recording so many times because she didn't want to be, shown up by Whitney. Like before they started, hitting the pavement together and promoting together and everything else, that media was still, or that narrative was still alive and well. And then it became very clear, oh, there really isn't anything to this. And from that moment on, we saw both of them continue to speak so highly of one another that really you saw the rivalry narrative get put to bed.
Good night.
Good night.
Yes. Now, when was this in relation to, like, had Mariah started, like, left Sony and Tommy and started doing her own thing, or was this while she was still at Sony?
No, she definitely at this point had gotten out from under Tommy Matola.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was in a lot of ways kind of her new era. And I think just really solidified, at least for the two of them, this idea that we don't have to keep pitting them against one another. There's no point to it, like, which is really beautiful.
It is beautiful. And I was just thinking, what was so interesting to me is sort of in that, because they're, they're doing the song together. So they're in the same, like, clothing style, not the same clothes, but in the same universe. And so there's a version where it's almost like, kind of given that most of what Mariah was doing at the time was more like playful and more like pop of that moment and useful, to do something like this that is more iconic and more typically Whitney, it's almost like going back to the origin point in a way. Oh, y'all wanted me to be this Whitney. Look, I can be in this and I can do this, but I can do my version of it and I can do all these other things too,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I saw some articles speaking about this song, how really for both of them, because even Whitney had progressed her sound in a way that was, I would call it a bit more R&B, a bit more like production heavy, right? Because the next album after this is My Love Is Your Love. I don't know if you remember that album from Whitney. And then the next album for Mariah after this is Rainbow. Neither of those albums sound anything like this song, right? Like, this is just such a classic power ballad, and we did not get any of that on their next two albums. So I almost think for both of them, it was a way to sort of like go back to their roots, but on their terms.
Yeah.
Which was really nice.
I love that. And I love that reading of it. Yes.
So before I get to Queens Helping Queens, I do just want to say, like I said, from this moment on, you really saw this narrative get put to bed. And even when once Whitney passed, Mariah just spoke so highly of their relationship. And when she was on Good Morning America, shortly after Whitney had passed, she said this: "I'm almost incapable of talking about it. It's very heavy for me emotionally. It was great." She's saying that in relation to working with Whitney. "It was great, and I don't think people could ever understand our relationship. There was always this supposed rivalry in the beginning, and then we did the duet, and we became friends. I loved her. We all loved her. May she rest in peace. Her legend's gonna go on forever." Which is just, like, kind of hard for me to read without getting emotional because, like, I mean, Whitney was just such a treasure, and knowing that, like, we all knew that, but also Mariah, who did spend so many years being pitted against her, in this moment is saying what we all know and believe, that she is a treasure, she is a legend. It's really, really beautiful.
It's really beautiful. Oh. I'm sad that we've lost Whitney, but I love Mariah's remembrance of her.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've made it to our Queens Helping Queens segment, but Adrienne, you told me you wanted to take it this time, so I am passing the torch to you. What have you got?
Okay, well, I mean, this is off the top of my head for the season finale, so I think you've done all the heavy lifting this season. I think I can bear this laurel for a second. So I would say that Whitney helped Mariah. I think it's very clear in having a blueprint, right? Like in having a way to have an audience to tap into a type of song that was really resonating at the time. I think that was really clear and helped rocket Mariah, who's incredibly talented always, but into tapping into the zeitgeist. Whitney made that model for her. So I think she helped her. What do you think? Do you agree?
100%. And absolutely, I would make the same point. I think Whitney very much acted as a blueprint and one that Tommy Matola was able to follow. And I don't think Mariah hates the fact that she started off kind of following in Whitney's footprints, because it did catapult her to success. I think she would both acknowledge it and say, like, obviously I still did the work to get where I am. But yeah, there was a blueprint, and I believe Mariah is probably grateful to Whitney for that.
And now here's my counter pitch that how did Mariah help Whitney? So when I was looking at that video, that was on Whitney's channel, and I sort of remember it as, I mean, obviously it was a duet. They're both on it. They share it. But much like it was Beyonce's duet with Miley Cyrus for the Two Most Wanted, this felt like Whitney's duet with Mariah, right? Like Whitney leads in, is the first person to sing. It's on her Vivo, you know, all of that. So I would say that Mariah agreeing to come on the song to make it this doubly iconic moment at a time in their careers where they were both like going in different directions away from the power ballad. Like the iconicness, they were both already icons, but to make this like a crowning achievement, that had to be something that they did together. So with Mariah agreeing to be on that with Whitney and, you know, doing this together, I think sealed them both got them both Oscars. Like I can say they have helped each other get Oscars. That is my pitch for how Mariah has helped Whitney.
I love it. I love it. Look at you.
So clearly these queens helped each other. And I mean, they were only ever going to be on, not that they couldn't individually be on Oprah, but in the way that you described, had to do that together. Listen.
I was just going to add one more petty one, because it's funny to me, which is I feel like when Whitney gave that answer, what do I think of her? I don't think of her. To me, that if we hadn't gotten that moment from Whitney, I don't know if we would have gotten the iconic moment from Mariah Carey when she was asked in an interview about Jennifer Lopez, and the interviewer said, "What do you think of J-Lo?" And she said, "I don't know her." Which, to this day, one of the most iconic interview questions and answers. Just, you know, shade, for sure shade, but I feel like she learned that from Whitney, and I don't know if we would have gotten it otherwise.
I've not witnessed this moment.
It's iconic.
I enjoy the joy it has brought in you. I enjoy that very much.
It is an iconic moment, and you know, queens learning how to shade from each other. I'm here for that too. I'm here for all of it. I'm here for the way they supported each other. I'm here for their iconic duet. I'm here for their massive careers. I'm just in awe of what they both did, and really excited to be ending the season with these two queens, because a super fan, a forever fan, and just grateful for what they've both given us.
Well, per usual, you have tapped me into fandoms that I've always casually dabbled in, and now I feel like I really understand the story, the music, everything behind it, and how these women really are queens. Oh, thank you, KJ. Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming up with this brilliant podcast. And, you know, I mean, y'all know I show up, but this woman puts this podcast together. So I just, you know, as long as we're handing out crowns, I hope you are wearing yours, because you deserve it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. As do you, my friend. Thank you for taking a chance, showing up with me here every week, not knowing what kind of shenanigans you were going to get yourself into. I appreciate you taking a risk on me. I love you, and you too deserve your crown.
Oh, I love you too. Even though I don't know you.
I don't know her.
I don't know her. I don't think of her. And so on that note, that's it for this season, everyone. Be sure to follow us on TikTok at Two Queens, Two Crowns, and to check out the podcast on YouTube, Two Queens, Two Crowns.
Adrienne and I would also love for you to follow us on our personal socials. I'm on TikTok at @IM_KJ Miller and YouTube with the handle IMKJ Miller. And Adrienne's on IG at Adrienne Rose White and TikTok at wrong_or_right. And be sure to subscribe on Patreon. Even while we are on our summer break, I will be releasing monthly bonus episodes. I'm not going to leave you hanging. So head over to patreon.com/2queens2crowns to subscribe. See you next season.
See